Hi guys, welcome back to G Chats with your host, G, me. We are joined in the G spot. I'm so excited to have you guys here today. I do want to give a disclaimer. I am sick. I feel like you could probably hear it in my voice. Maybe it won't pick up through the mic or on camera, but I hear it. I sound so nasally. I've been sneezing, coughing. Everyone around me has it. I was the last to get it, unfortunately. And I'm like, this is so close to my birthday. So I'm like, we gotta get rid of this, which is why I'm taking my immune boosting supplement, Thrive. And it's only day 3 of the cold, and I honestly feel good. It started with a sore throat. And yesterday, so it started Monday night with a sore throat. So Tuesday was the first official day. That day was just like complete sore throat. Yesterday was like scratchy throat and a cough. And today is just like chest congestion. I don't have any head congestion, although it sounds like I do, but I don't. So no fever, no nothing. I've been taking Thrive. I feel good, eating lots of healthy foods. My breakfast is always like avocado toast and stuff like that. So I'm just staying really healthy and hydrated during my cold. But regardless of the cold, what I wasn't going to let it do is stop me from making this video. This video is going to be about infertility. And I know when I say infertility, infertility is like a big word because there are so many layers to infertility. It isn't just a one size fits all, unfortunately. And I say unfortunately because that's what makes infertility so complex and so hard for so many women. So many women struggle with infertility for a really long time because it's not a one size fits all. It's a complex thing to be going through, and there's a lot to figure out when we're talking about infertility. Now, given that my specialty and my my research and everything is in the vaginal microbiome, I wanted to make a video for Infertility Awareness Week, and that's this week. Infertility Awareness Week is from April 20th to the 26th, if I'm not mistaken. And I really wanted to film this episode talking about how the vaginal microbiome is super connected to fertility and how a disrupted vaginal microbiome can impact your fertility and can, in some cases, be like a hidden infertility issue that's not talked about enough. Now, this is a growing and emerging space, so not everything is like factual. We're still learning. I mean, all of this is like factual of what we know right now, but it is still a growing space. So there's room for more information to come out in more upcoming years. But I just wanted to make sure, regardless of this cold, that I get this video out there to help educate you guys. If any of you are battling with infertility, something to really think about is the vaginal microbiome, because a lot of times in society, taking care of the vagina is really only done or pushed to be done so that you smell good or you taste good. And it's always like intended for those kind of things, especially for sex. But nobody talks about, like, what about those who want to reproduce and those who do want to get pregnant? Your vaginal microbiome does matter. It's not just all about smelling and tasting good. It can be for your own real health. Like if you are someone who wants to reproduce and you didn't know how important your vaginal microbiome is, this is definitely the episode for you to understand and learn just how important your microbiome is for fertility. So let's first talk about, and I'm not going to go too in depth with this part because I did talk about healthy hormones and balanced hormones in my birth control video. So if you want to know all about balanced hormones, please go watch that episode. But just briefly, what I will touch on is when your hormones are balanced and they are healthy, they work in a way where there's only a certain time of the month that your vagina is intentionally and your body is intentionally accepting sperm and seminal fluid, and that is during ovulation. So when you are ovulating, your body and your vagina will intentionally prepare for seminal fluid. The vagina knows that ejaculation fluid and sperm needs an alkaline environment, and that your seminal fluid is high on the pH scale. It's alkaline, it's basic, whereas the vagina is naturally acidic. And so the acidity isn't harmful to sperm. It doesn't kill the sperm, but sperm doesn't just live in the vagina. It needs to be taken to the egg. And what helps it do this is your cervical mucus. So that ejaculation fluid is what the sperm is living in when it's in the man and it comes out of the man. But that ejaculation fluid isn't the thing that liquefies and like carries it to the egg. What helps carry it to the egg is your cervical mucus. So this is why around ovulation, our cervical mucus increases to this clear, runny, thin, and watery like fluid that we have this discharge, and it is higher on the pH scale. So our vaginas naturally are about a 3.8 to a 4.5. This fluid can sit at around a 5.5, and it's doing this to temporarily host and hold the sperm and carry the sperm to the egg. And that's something that I feel like a lot of people don't know about. And so the sperm is deposited through ejaculation fluid in the vagina, in the vaginal canal during intercourse. And the seminal fluid temporarily rises the vaginal pH to protect the sperm from the normally acidic environment. Because as I mentioned, it's not just going to kill the sperm, but over a time period, it's not the best environment for it. So the cervix will produce the cervical mucus that I just talked about, which is the perfect type of mucus that sperm needs to help the sperm swim through the female reproductive tract. So the cervix acts as a gatekeeper. We have to remember when we think of the anatomy of the cervix, you have your vagina, and then your cervix, if you've ever seen a picture, literally kind of looks like a butthole or like the tip of a penis, honestly. Like think of a sphincter, think of the tip of a penis. That's what the cervix looks like. It's like almost like a muscle, but there is a hole. There's a hole there. And so the cervix acts as a gatekeeper, and it filters out poor quality versus good quality sperm. So your cervix is what chooses the best sperm and decides who it's going to let in and who it's not going to let in. So what happens is once the cervix, with the help of the cervical mucus, chooses the sperm that is the strongest, the most mobile, and is moving the fastest, what it does is it allows for the sperm to come through, and the sperm then enters the uterus. And this is assisted by the uterine contractions that then help guide it towards the fallopian tubes. Because if you didn't know, when you ovulate, ovulation is when the egg releases from the ovary. And where does the egg go and sits to get fertilized? The fallopian tube. I've actually met a lot of people who think that the egg gets fertilized inside of the uterus. No, the egg gets fertilized inside of the fallopian tube. And that is where fertilization occurs. So the egg leaves the ovaries, sits in the fallopian tube for like 24 hours, waits to get fertilized, and then travels to the uterus. So sperm has to go through the cervix, through the uterus, and up to the fallopian tubes. So in the fallopian tubes, this is where fertilization occurs, and the sperm must reach the ampulla, which is the wider part of the fallopian tube, and this is where the egg is typically waiting after ovulation. So once fertilization takes place, this is when a viable egg is present, and one sperm out of millions will penetrate the egg's outer layer and fertilizes it, and the egg becomes a zygote. And then now the egg starts its journey back down the fallopian tube to implant and go into the uterus. So that is the process in which how our hormones are functioning, what our hormones are doing during this time. And a very, very, very important hormone during this time is none other than estrogen. Estrogen is rising and in fact peaking during your ovulation. And estrogen is so important because this is what increases the cervical mucus and gives your mucus that watery, runny discharge, your vagina, this discharge. And it also, what's really important is that glycogen is being produced because of estrogen. So glycogen is a polysaccharide that good bacteria in the vagina uses. And this good bacteria in the vagina is known as lactobacillus. It uses this glycogen supply, this polysaccharide, as energy, and it converts this polysaccharide into lactic acid. And that's what makes your vagina acidic. So we all heard the vagina needs to be acidic. And I said the vagina is acidic, but why? It is because of lactic acid. Now, where does the lactic acid come from? It is using glycogen to produce lactic acid. And the glycogen production comes from estrogen. So estrogen is what's feeding, ultimately, the good bacteria. And so having balanced hormones not only naturally helps with the way that the cervical mucus will change and the environment of the actual pathway of the sperm going to the egg. But what it does do is impact at its core the first place that sperm and ejaculation fluid meets, and that is the vagina. So when ejaculation fluid exists in the vagina, the reason why, even if your hormones are balanced, for example, if your vaginal microbiome isn't balanced, this alters the first stop of the sperm because ejaculation fluid exists in the vagina. And if you have an infection, for example, BV, and if you didn't know, you need to watch the BV episode that I have. I believe it was like episode 2 on the podcast, but bacterial vaginosis is dysbiosis in the vagina, meaning that you lost good bacteria. Now, there's a number of reasons that you could lose good bacteria in the vagina. It could be because you took antibiotics. It could be because you douched. It could be for a number of reasons. You lost this good bacteria. You're going through menopause, or let's say because most people who are going through menopause aren't trying to conceive. Let's say you have PCOS and your estrogen is low, and that is making you lose the good bacteria in your vagina. Ultimately, when you lose this good bacteria in your vagina, bad bacteria that naturally lives inside of the vagina can now overgrow because there's nothing stopping it from not growing. Because you have to remember, bad bacteria like Gardnerella, Prevotella, even Ureaplasma, Mycoplasma, these different strains don't like an acidic environment, and they can't really grow in an acidic environment. They want basic. They want an alkaline environment. And so what happens is when you lose this good bacteria for whatever reason, these opportunistic bad guys are going to overgrow. This is where your vagina and your body recognizes, whoa, we shouldn't have this overgrowth of bad guys. And so the vagina responds to this through discharge, through cervical mucus. And so what you will see is either thickened, pasty. That's the same when we see pasty discharge during yeast infections and that chalky discharge. When you see green, yellow, discolored, thick discharge that has an odor, these are all signs of your vagina is recognizing, whoa, something's not right. And its first sign and way of telling you is through discharge, because your body is trying to expel it and fight it off. Think of, I have a cold right now. I have mucus. Mucus itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. The mucus that you blow out of your nose, that you're coughing up, is your body's natural immune system and way of responding to bad guys, whether it's a virus or a bacteria. Your body is recognizing, oh no, there is something here that shouldn't be here, and it's responding to that and trying to expel it and get rid of it. And so you see the same concept in the vagina. It's discharge, it's mucus, and your body is trying to expel it. Your vagina is trying to expel it. But that impairs the whole tract that we talked about for sperm. It impairs the sperm's ability to swim, and it impairs your cervical mucus's ability to carry the sperm and take it to the egg. Because unfortunately, if you have this thickened discharge that is chalky, pasty, whatever the case, it's thicker, it's not that the good quality cervical discharge that your vagina needs during the time of ovulation. It's actually too thick and it's discolored, it's not healthy, it's not going to be able to carry the sperm, and more importantly, the sperm's not even going to be able to penetrate through it to even get to the cervix. It's going to get stuck and it might die off. And that's a conversation that I feel like not enough people know about and not enough people talk about. So estrogen is super, super important. Yes, and your hormones are super important, but losing, and that's why I wanted to touch how important hormones are, because if your estrogen is ruined or affected in various ways, whether that's being postpartum, or you are having PCOS, or you're going through menopause, or you have some kind of hormonal condition, or let's say you're stressed out. A lot of people don't realize high elevated cortisol levels in turn, it lowers estrogen. And if you lower estrogen, you can affect your vagina and your vaginal microbiome and your discharge quality. And this could put you at an increased risk of infections and also alter your cervical mucus and the quality of your ovulation cervical mucus. Also, hormonal contraceptives, many of them can suppress lactobacillus populations, and it does depend on the formula, but it can alter estrogen and progesterone balance, which shifts the microbiome composition in the long term. So dysbiosis is a real thing, and dysbiosis is when there is a lack of good bacteria and an overgrowth of bad bacteria, and this increases the pH, and this protective acidic environment disappears. And another thing to know is that when this acidic environment disappears and this alkaline environment that's filled with bad bacteria takes over, this actually can impair the sperm's movement, because the sperm doesn't want this kind of alkaline shift. The sperm wants the alkaline shift from your cervical mucus, not from your vaginal microbiome. So some pathogens also, when you're having BV and you're having this dysbiosis, some pathogens secrete toxins and enzymes that actually damage the sperm's DNA and its membranes. So it can actually kill off the sperm. And as I mentioned, cervical mucus can become thick, sticky, or hostile, which can trap or prevent the sperm from passing through the cervix. And this also, unfortunately, another thing that's not talked about enough is when you have dysbiosis and imbalance of the vaginal microbiome, inflammation and immune responses take over. So pathogens trigger cytokines, which sperm is targeted as a foreign entity in this situation. So you already have an imbalance that your body, remember how I talked about and made the connection of mucus and your body trying to expel that? Your vagina is trying to do the same thing. It recognizes, oh no, like we have an infection. So there's a lot of cytokines that are triggered. And so one of those things, if you are trying to conceive with this imbalance, your vagina is going to recognize sperm as a foreign entity that it's going to want to target as well. So it gets attacked by the immune cells and can kill off the sperm, and ultimately can be what's preventing you from getting pregnant. And so there's increased oxidative stress and tissue damage along the vagina as well, which the vagina wants to be plump, moisturized, thickened, and healthy when it's trying to accept fertility and accept fertilization. And if there is this stress, oxidative stress and tissue damage to the vaginal lining, it just isn't a favorable environment for sperm during this time. Additionally, and I really want to mention this because it is possible to have fertilization occur even with dysbiosis in the vagina, but there are implantation problems. So remember, fertilization happens in the fallopian tubes, but now once fertilization takes place, it needs to go to the uterus and implant. And so there could be ascending dysbiosis, meaning that the dysbiosis in the vagina, if it is not addressed, it's not treated with antibiotics and taken care of, these bad guys can migrate to the uterus. They can pass through the cervix and go up to the uterus. And unfortunately, this can cause chronic endometritis. So endometritis is inflammation of the endometrium, the uterine lining, and this inflammation 9 times out of 10, it's happening because there's bacteria, there's an infection within the uterine lining, which then can stop implantation from happening. So it might not be the fertilization that's the problem, but the implantation due to endometritis, which a lot of times is such an underlying, like, hidden case of infertility that not many physicians talk about. And so unfortunately, it can persist because some people don't even have symptoms of endometritis, and this can persist and be chronic, and it could be a reason why there's chronic infertility. And so an embryo can't implant in an inflamed endometrium and an infected endometrium. And so this is something that's definitely not talked about. And there is this infertility spiral that does exist with hormonal imbalances and the microbiome. So I wanted to touch on number one, PCOS, since it is super common. PCOS is notoriously known for having insulin resistance, and insulin resistance triggers higher androgens like testosterone, which then lowers estrogen regulation. And if you lower estrogen, you lower glycogen and you lower lactobacillus good bacteria, which increases the risk of things like bacterial vaginosis, which increases the risk of things like endometritis, especially if BV is left untreated. If you don't treat bacterial vaginosis, you don't kill off this overgrowth of bad guys, you increase your risk of this bad bacteria spreading to the uterus. And I just want to note, and I will touch on this in a little bit, but even if you do have fertilization and you do have implantation, that does happen while you have BV, while you have dysbiosis in the microbiome, you are at an increased risk of miscarriages. You are at an increased risk of preterm birth. You are at an increased risk of a low birth weight baby if you have dysbiosis in the vagina. Research tells us this. Research shows us this. So you could be blessed enough to get fertilization and implantation, but having a dysbiosis in your vagina more than likely sets you up for an unhealthy pregnancy. And so addressing vaginal microbiome health when you are trying to conceive is super important, because so many people don't know about the importance of their vaginal microbiome. So there are people who have PCOS who unfortunately have physicians that focus on egg quality, and ovulation quality. And that is because, of course, the hormones are impaired in this situation, and sometimes there's low FSH, which can mean weak ovulation and weak egg quality. And that's kind of the thought process of what could be stopping someone with PCOS from getting pregnant. But what's not talked about is if there's this impaired ability of balanced hormones with someone like PCOS, well, there's likely an impaired vaginal microbiome. There's an imbalance in the vaginal microbiome. And if this is something that is present, if we address egg quality, great. But if we never check up on the vaginal microbiome or the uterine microbiome, which a lot of people don't know, your vaginal microbiome bacteria can spread to the uterine microbiome. And so if you don't address that with someone with PCOS and we only focus on the ovaries and the egg quality, we're doing a disservice to these patients because their imbalance of their hormones is contributing to an imbalance in their vagina. We know that estrogen plays a role in fueling and keeping lactobacillus good bacteria alive and thriving. And we know that people with PCOS typically have insulin resistance and excess androgens, which lowers estrogen, which we know will affect lactobacillus quality and lactobacillus populations. And so knowing this is so important because we can't just address one part of the clinical picture. Addressing egg quality, LH hormone, the luteinizing hormone, the follicle stimulating hormone, yes, it's important. But then simultaneously addressing, oh, well, this is impacting the vaginal microbiome. Let's examine the vaginal microbiome. Let's test and swab and culture the vaginal microbiome, the uterine microbiome, which in that case will be a biopsy. But starting with the vaginal microbiome is a good starting point, because we know that people with PCOS are impacted, their vaginal microbiomes are impacted by their hormones. So that is just something that's really important when you're having PCOS and you're struggling with PCOS, addressing the whole picture and not just part of the hormones and part of the fertility picture is super, super important. And it's something that's not, unfortunately, talked about enough. And people can have BV and they can be asymptomatic. They can have this overgrowth of bad bacteria and not have symptoms, and it just gets overlooked. And so people don't know. And over years and years and years of time, if you don't know that you have this imbalance in your microbiome, this can spread to the uterus and cause endometritis, which can be why you're having chronic miscarriages. You're having so many miscarriages, and it could be why you're having premature babies or preterm birth, low birth weight baby. There's just increased health risks. There's also studies showing that if you have an imbalance in your vaginal microbiome, there's an increased risk to preeclampsia. So it's just really important to address that. Another thing is endometriosis. Now, I did do an endometriosis episode. It's about like 2 or 3 episodes back, but endometriosis isn't just endometrial, or like the simplified version of endometrial tissue that's misplaced and it's outside of the uterus. That's not true. It is chronic whole body inflammation, and that can be applied to the uterine microbiome as well, and the uterine inflammation sites. And so there are inflammatory markers that may impair egg quality, sperm function, and endometrial receptivity. A lot of people with endometriosis can have adenomyosis, which is when the endometrial tissue, so this is real endometrial tissue growing into the myometrium, which is the muscle of the endometrium, of the uterine lining. And so this is true misplaced abnormal growth of the endometrium growing somewhere that it's not supposed to be. And this can affect the fertilized egg's ability to implant in the uterus. We also have to talk about menstrual cycle fluctuations. So some people don't have PCOS or don't have a hormonal condition that has like a name, but they do have irregular periods and menstrual cycle fluctuations, and hormone shifts can cause cyclical microbiome changes. So like, for example, progesterone post-ovulation can allow temporary loss of lactobacillus, which increases the risk for infections during the peak window for implantation. So your like fertile window. So this can make you more susceptible to these infections, which actually then can prevent you from getting pregnant. So this part of the episode, I wanted to make sure I highlighted under discussed conditions that impact fertility. And the first one is endometritis, not endometriosis, which, as I already discussed and got ahead of myself, is inflammation of the endometrium, the uterine lining. And it is often asymptomatic, and it's found in unexplained infertility cases or IVF failures. So it is something to look into if you are struggling with infertility. It's linked to BV bacteria specifically and microbiome imbalances that have spread to the uterus. And it is treated with antibiotics and or probiotics and anti-inflammatory supplements and some anti-inflammatory drugs. The other thing that we need to discuss is latent infections and infections that aren't talked about enough, like ureaplasma and mycoplasma. So these are not included in regular STI panels, and I'm going to touch on these too. I'm going to take a pause before I get through the rest of the under-discussed conditions that can be impacting fertility. And I want to make sure that we touch on ureaplasma and mycoplasma because they're not talked about enough, but they are opportunistic pathogens in shifting the microbiome. So Something to know is that ureaplasma and mycoplasma are often present in low levels in a normal microbiome. So that's something that a lot of people, I think, don't know. They think ureaplasma and mycoplasma are just STIs, and that's kind of the narrative that has spread on like wildfire on social media. But they are very normal pathogens that exist in the genitourinary tract. Like they exist within the urinary system, the vaginal system. Like it is a thing that is present. They are normal, but in low amounts. And usually they're in low amounts when the microbiome is normal. Now, what makes the microbiome normal? Good bacteria. A healthy microbiome is when it's dominated with lactobacillus. And this dominant lactobacillus is what keeps these bad guys in theory, but normal bad guys in check. And so they become a problem when this balance is off, when you lose this good bacteria. So ureaplasma and mycoplasma, specifically like Mycoplasma hominins, are frequently found as commensal, which basically means that they're harmless and they're just co-residents in the urogenital tract. They're normal, especially in sexually active individuals. And when lactobacillus dominates the vaginal microbiome, the pH is low, it's acidic. There's antimicrobial compounds like lactic acid, hydrogen peroxide, H2O2, and bacteriocins, which help suppress the overgrowth of these opportunistic organisms. So yes, in a healthy lactobacillus dominant vaginal microbiome, ureaplasma and M. hominins is usually kept in check. Now, when the microbiome is imbalanced, lactobacillus levels drop. This means that an imbalance means lactobacillus drops and the pH rises, and anaerobes and opportunistic bacteria like ureaplasma and mycoplasma gain a foothold. And this often happens, and again, I mentioned this already, you lose this good bacteria through using antibiotics for strep throat or hormonal changes, you're postpartum, you're going through menopause, or you have an IUD, you use spermicides, lubricants. There are so many things that can kill off good bacteria in the vagina, douching. These things can all kill off this good bacteria, and this is what triggers your pH to rise when you don't have this good bacteria. And in these states, ureaplasma and M. hominins can shift from being normal co-residents of the vagina to pro-inflammatory, fertility disrupting organisms that lead to an infection of the cervix, so cervicitis, endometritis, an infection of the endometrium, of the uterine lining. It can be responsible for miscarriages, embryo implantation failure, and even male infertility. They can inhabit semen and damage sperm, as I talked about in the beginning. Because I mentioned when you have a dysbiosis, these bad guys can produce these toxins and enzymes that can actually kill off the sperm and address, like ruin the DNA, attack the DNA of the sperm and kill off the sperm. And so it can be the reason for male infertility because it's harming the sperm. So Mycoplasma genitalium, though, that I want to bring up is different because I've been saying ureaplasma, which there's multiple strains of ureaplasma. This is normally like a co-resident, but mycoplasma is co-residents, except for Mycoplasma genitalium, which is different. It's not commensal, so it doesn't exist in the vagina naturally. It is a true pathogen. It's not a part of the normal flora. It should not be present in the vagina or the urogenital tract at all. This is the one that's truly a sexually transmitted infection, truly an STI. It behaves similarly to chlamydia, which is sexually transmitted. It can cause urethritis, cervicitis, pelvic inflammatory disease, and it can impair the fallopian tubes and cause tubule factor infertility. It can also persist silently and cause chronic inflammation, but the kicker here is that it's resistant to many antibiotics and it's misdiagnosed very, very often because it's not included on standard STI panels. So it is something that you need to like beg your doctor to test for Mycoplasma genitalium and Mycoplasma hominins and Ureaplasma just to see, because they're not regularly tested or looked or checked for. I mean, the vaginal microbiome altogether is not something that regular doctors' offices typically look at when we're discussing infertility, which is super unfortunate and super frustrating. But it is something that you need to be aware of so that if you are battling infertility, it's something that you can proactively ask your doctor about and see if that is the thing that could potentially be prohibiting you from getting pregnant. So that's ureaplasma and mycoplasma. So pelvic inflammatory disease is exactly what it sounds like. It's inflammation of the pelvic muscles, the pelvic tissues, the pelvic organs. And this is something that typically can happen when bacterial vaginosis and sexually transmitted infections are left untreated. So if you don't know you have a dysbiosis in your vagina, it can spread to the uterus and cause endometritis, but it can spread and cause pelvic inflammatory disease, which is why I tell people and why I make videos of like teaching young girls to take care of their vaginas and their vaginal microbiomes isn't about making your vagina smell and taste good. This is something that's important because if you have an imbalance in your vaginal microbiome, it's not about odor and taste. Sure, having a balanced vaginal microbiome so that it doesn't have an odor and doesn't have a funky taste is great. But that's not what we should wire young girls' brains to believe in, or even men. We should care about a balanced microbiome, because if your microbiome isn't balanced, screw the odor and taste. An imbalance in your vaginal microbiome can spread to the uterus and can spread to your reproductive organs and reproductive muscles and the pelvic floor muscles, and can literally cause pelvic inflammatory disease, which is a whole pelvic inflammation of the pelvic organs, the pelvic muscles, and it can create excess scar tissue that binds to different organs. So it can actually bind the ovaries to the fallopian tubes with this sticky scar tissue. It's very scary. So taking care of your vagina is not all about making sure you smell and taste good. No, like there's serious health risks like pelvic inflammatory disease with something like a vaginal dysbiosis and having BV and having an overgrowth of this bad bacteria. I'm just so tired of the narrative being making sure that you don't smell, like odor and taste. Who cares about odor and taste? Remove that from the picture. Let's talk about pelvic inflammatory disease, because that is something that can happen if you leave this bad bacteria, this overgrowth of bad bacteria untreated. And so pelvic inflammatory disease is, as it sounds, inflammation. And sometimes there's not overt symptoms. It can take a while to progress. And when it progresses and is showing symptoms, it's also often very serious and very hard to like reverse the damage that's already been done throughout this process. This scar tissue buildup and production, it's really hard to just like reverse it. And it can cause tubule damage to the fallopian tubes. It can cause ciliary dysfunction. It can cause scar tissue, and it can originate from untreated bacterial vaginosis and sexually transmitted infections. So another thing is cervical factor infertility from microbiome disruption. So pathogens can degrade the protective cervical mucus, which can remove the sperm gatekeeper function. So I already touched on this, and I don't want to make this one too long, but we already talked about how cervical mucus and the cervix in general is very, very selective, and the thing that chooses which sperm it wants and doesn't want. And so Unfortunately, these pathogens can degrade the protective cervical mucus, and this can remove sperm gatekeeper function because the cervix is acting as a gatekeeper. So is the cervical mucus, and these pathogens can disrupt that. And this is known as cervical factor infertility from microbiome disruptions. So that was a long mouthful, but that's another thing, which we already talked about, but there is like a technical name for it. And then number 5 is inflammatory autoimmunity. So not enough people know that dysbiosis in the vagina can trigger inflammation throughout the whole body, or a chronic infection elsewhere in your body can trigger inflammation. And so natural killer NK cell overactivation is a thing that can happen, which can result in embryo rejection. And this is often missed without specific immunological testing. So these are just all of the things that can happen, that is possible to happen, and not often discussed in clinical settings, on the internet, and just with patients and even with research. And they are growing emerging spaces and fields, but it is something that we need to think about and something that needs to be talked about more, which is why I wanted to include them in this episode. So that is ultimately the root of this. And a lot of them, the root is the vaginal microbiome. And the core here and the takeaway here is that restoring balance is so important. So what you can do is promote lactobacillus dominance. So probiotics that are multi-strained, high CFU, vaginally relevant strains like Lactobacillus rhamnosus, Lactobacillus reuteri, Lactobacillus crispatus, these support a healthy vaginal microbiome and support the natural functions of the vagina. And also, you want to support keeping them. So supporting vaginal hygiene, no douching, no pH balancing products, just supporting keeping your vagina hygienic, washing externally, not putting boric acid up your vagina, not irritating the vaginal lining, not allowing for seminal fluid in the vagina 24/7. You want to be selective of when you allow this fluid in your vagina. The only time your vagina wants this fluid is if you are trying to get pregnant during ovulation. Otherwise, the vagina doesn't care for it. The vagina does not want it. So really just promoting the good bacteria in your vagina, and then having vaginal hygiene practices that keep that good bacteria, that support that good bacteria, is super important. Another thing, because we know what can shift this balance in the vagina, is your hormones. So managing hormonal balance is super important. Addressing the root causes of any hormonal imbalances. So if you have PCOS, you have thyroid disorders, insulin resistance, you kind of want to address what is the thing that's throwing the wrench in this system. Is it my cortisol level? Is it my insulin, my blood sugar, my glucose? Is it my sleep-wake cycle, my melatonin? All of these things matter. So you could support your hormones and support ovulatory function with something like seed cycling, adaptogens like ashwagandha, rhodiola, or medication under guidance with your doctor. Another thing is address silent inflammation. So consider testing for endometritis, mycoplasma, or even latent infections, ureaplasma. All of these things. Look into pelvic inflammatory disease. Consider if these are the silent killers here, the things that are stopping you from getting pregnant, but you're not having overt symptoms. They are inflammatory. It's inflammation that could be preventing you from getting pregnant, but in a lot of cases, they could be pretty silent. So you can address this naturally at home, or for starters at home, with anti-inflammatory diets, pelvic floor therapy, and stress regulation. And then another thing is tracking and testing. So consider vaginal microbiome testing if your doctor is not doing it. There are 3 different tests that I know of that you could use. There's Evie, Juno, and Day. All 3 of these do vaginal microbiome testing, so it would be great to do that if you have the budget. They are out-of-pocket expenses. I'm not sure if they are covered. I believe Day is covered with HSA, FSA, and maybe Evie. I don't know about Juno, but they are microbiome vaginal testing kits. samples, so you could see what bacteria is dominating in your vagina and find out if you have a species in an overgrowth of a bad species that could be preventing you from getting pregnant. And fertility awareness methods are also important to consider, and it can align with timing your body's natural cycles. So again, if you are someone who has pretty normal hormones, you have very regular periods, you don't miss a period, you can track your cycle naturally to figure out when you are ovulating and intentionally try to have unprotected sex and ejaculation fluid introduced in the vagina during this time so that you could get pregnant, because that's really the only window and the only time that your vagina is accepting of this fluid. So my closing thoughts for this is that infertility is not just about egg quality. It's always made out to be about egg quality, and it's not just about that. Your vagina is a part of the fertility equation, and when her ecosystem is out of balance, conception does become harder, and research is highlighting that. The research is new, but it is progressing, and it is showing us that every single day. So we need to stop normalizing the unexplained infertility when we're just not given the right answers and maybe not asking the right questions because we don't know. And it's not the woman's fault that they don't know to ask these questions. It's just been told to us, oh, this is unexplained infertility, or it's chalked up to egg quality. And if your egg quality is good, you literally are a mysterious infertile case. And the missing link could be your vaginal microbiome. So this video was meant to give you all of this information so that you could proactively ask those questions, ask the right questions, and potentially get the right answers and the right guidance, the right treatments, the right testing, and all of these things. So your microbiome matters and your hormones matter. They go hand in hand, and your story matters. I don't want any of you to feel hopeless. And I know so many people who are battling infertility unfortunately do feel hopeless, especially when they've seen so many specialists and it's kind of like oh, we don't know really what's wrong. So I hope and I pray that this video offered a lot of good information and really showcased how connected the vagina, the hormones, and fertility are, how connected they all are, and they're really just stitched together. Healthy hormones equals a healthy vaginal microbiome, which together equals a greater, healthier outcome and better chances for pregnancy. So it's something to really know about, think about, consider, and explore if you are trying to get pregnant and if you are someone specifically struggling with getting pregnant. So I hope this video was incredibly helpful for you guys, and I loved making it. Infertility Awareness Week is very near and dear to my heart. To what I know about my health today, I don't struggle with infertility. I am not trying to conceive, but I do hope and pray to be a mommy one day. I hope that I can conceive, and because I want to be a mom someday, and because I've heard so many stories from so many women who are battling infertility. I have friends, I have family who's battled with infertility. It is near and dear to my heart, and I hope that this video comforted you. I hope this video shed new light on something that you didn't previously know about. I hope that it makes you feel empowered, and now you have the tools and the information to ask the right questions and to hopefully receive better answers and better outcomes. So I love you guys so much, and I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I did, and I will see you in the next one next week. Bye guys.